Thank you for joining us here at Doc NYC, and thank you also to Sundancetv for making it possible for you all to have a sneak preview of this series. First of all, thank you so much for being part of this. I'm going to just start things off with a couple of quick questions for all of you, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. Sorry I have to do this off the phone, but my handwriting's terrible, so I didn't want to transcribe it. I'm going to start off with Jeff, actually. You're the author of the book that inspired this series, and can you tell us a little bit about what brought you to telling this story, the research that went into it, how long you worked on it? If you can just give us a little background on the road to Jonestown.
I eventually spent about 3.5 years focusing on this. This was my whole job. And what I wanted to do was take a look at what really is a seminal moment in American history. It's something everyone remembers. And I certainly, when I started this, the only thing I knew was what everybody else knew, whatever the press reports were that we remembered. And I wanted to write a book that would not just say what happened, but why and how it happened. What forces came together, what things happened in history, what decisions were made that culminated in this. And thanks to some very courageous people, some wonderful folks that I've met along the way, and several of them are sitting here on this stage in front of you today, who were willing to look back on such a difficult, terrible, traumatic time and talk about it honestly. And I'm so glad that you're going to get to hear directly from them these things. History is never secondhand. There's always the truth out there, and there's always more to the story than we know. And the book was an attempt at that, and I'm so grateful to Steve and David. I'm so grateful to Sundancetv and all the people who were involved, especially Director Shan Nicholson. I think they're giving you a chance to listen and to see and to understand a really complex story that was in no way as simple as most people have thought it was.
Absolutely, and I'd love to turn to Stephen and talk a little bit about. So, I mean, Jeff's book is close to 600 pages. How do you distill something so well researched and such a great story into a series? Like, can you talk a little bit about the process of adaptation?
Yeah, I mean, he wrote an amazing book with a lot of research, and then there's a whole team that makes up one of these shows, and a lot of research was done. Tim and John who are here, and Thaddeus and a lot of other people that worked on this had to go through. I think there were 40,000 photographs, over 1,000 hours of audio tape, and just tons of videotape, as you see. And I think what was so interesting about this is getting the survivors to actually speak. And I think Shan did 7-8 hour interviews with each one, and then having the research to go and find the actual footage that matched up. And as you get into episodes 3 and 4 of this, you'll see that what the survivors are talking about, you're seeing the actual footage, and it starts to match up even more. And I think it really tells the story in a way that's pretty amazing.
Absolutely, and can you talk a little bit about that archival material and sort of where, there's a lot of stuff here that nobody's seen before in terms of the general public. Can you talk a little bit about sort of finding that, getting access to it, the CIA material, FBI material, et cetera?
Well, I think Thaddeus is in the audience right now, and Tim and John also, but I think it was a search all over the country to get this material, and it was not easy, and this project took over a year to make. Right. So it was very intensive, and not only that, but you'll see as you go forward in this series when some of these survivors are talking about actual moments as small as, I looked back and saw Jim Jones doing this thing with his mouth. They had to go in and actually find that footage of that moment, and that just, these things, as you're watching, you see these things are happening a little bit at a time. It didn't go from joining the church to the end we all know. It happened a little bit at a time, and so finding that footage, I think, was so important explaining how this happened.
Right. And if I can turn to the survivors, I mean, Jordan, I'll go to you if you don't mind. You know, this is also coming out in a 40th, it's memorializing the 40th anniversary. I mean, looking back now over that time, can you talk a little bit about sort of being part of a project like this to sort of, again, kind of revisit this, but also really tell the fuller story of what really went on, why people joined the temple, and sort of what really happened in Jonestown?
Well, it's been a process to actually be able to participate in a documentary and be able to speak articulately about something that I began in when I was 12 years old. And so your question, I'm sorry.
Just in terms of sort of revisiting this material so many years later and kind of sort of casting a new light on it, revisiting it after so many years and sort of telling a fuller story than what many people may think they know about it.
Well, it's refreshing to see the depth that is gone into in what I've seen so far, and I'm sorry, I'm kind of emotional,
yeah.
But
yeah, no, I take your time certainly, and it's obviously this is your lives on screen in many ways, and it's something that you are asked to sort of relive, and it's a trauma, I'm sure, and especially with you being there at such a young age. You know, I guess it's a question of like how much of it is cathartic for you, and how much of it is you're obviously taking part in this, so so you're supportive of it. So if you could talk a little bit just about sort of what you're wanting people to sort of understand that maybe they don't.
Okay. Well, the complexity of People's Temple is something that I feel that has not been really understood, and the real reason why people hung in there. And as you were mentioning, the progression of things. You know, you go in and you see this really wonderful thing happening, and then psychologically there's this other thing that happens where, yes, you're uncomfortable a lot of the time. You see things that and experience things that you're not comfortable with, but to be I consider myself a revolutionary, and so in order to do that, then yes, we were going to be uncomfortable. We were going to have to give up personal desires for the greater good. So it was very complex, and honestly, it took me a long time to even, when I came back from Guyana, to be able to talk to people about it, and you know, just work through all of the intricate interweaving aspects. So.
Yeah. Thank you. And if I could turn to Jim. Yeah.
Hey, how you doing?
How are you? If I can turn to you, you know, in many ways, I want to ask you about sort of the legacy of, you know, you bear his name. How have you dealt with that over the last 40 years? How you know, what do you? I guess your participation in the film is interesting to me because, you know, you're part of the family, and you're also, you know, were there in a way. You experienced it, and so, but you have this personal connection that's different from others in a certain way.
I think to start off with, that legacy or that burden is shared. I have his name, but that guy next to you has his blood.
Right.
So it's kind of a shared, it's kind of a shared. I'm not going to say what's better or worse, but it's kind of shared. I think one is that you have Jim Jones on one side, and I talk with my hands, so this mic thing's messing me up. You have Jim Jones on one side, and you have the beliefs of what he was trying to do. I honestly believe a lot of the things he was trying to do were very true and valued to him. I mean, I am the first African-American child adopted in Indiana. Indiana. I mean, that's where the Klan raises its flag still. And I'm the first African-American child born, adopted to a Caucasian family. That social worker was fired. That judge was ousted. So And I was given his name. Some people can say it was trickeration. I know the love I felt was I was treated like his son. The other piece is that you had these people, you know, that was, you know, I said this earlier tonight. You had the words of Marcus Garvey going back to Africa and reclaiming. Well, we didn't make it Africa, me and South America, but we were building a new world. And those people, those members, you know, Jordan and Stephan was down there building it, building this new world to create an environment that didn't have the sexism, the ageism, the racism that we had in the 60s and 70s. I think we have them now too, but you know, it was very obvious and some of the reason why People's Temple thrived. So there is a side that I think people need to know. And, you know, they gave up a lot. But I think they gave up a lot because they were trying to obtain something that was very needed. There were senior citizen homes, drug rehab centers. I was involved at a young age and part of the Kwanzaa youth program in NAACP in San Francisco. That's powerful. You know, you're a young black man learning how to work within the NAACP. My father encouraged me to join the Fruit of Islam. You know, had a problem with that because they said I couldn't accept things from white people, and my grandmother gave me a car, so I gave up my political stance. But I think the point is, the car was more important at 16. But the point I'm making is there's a legacy of Jim Jones, but there's a real legacy in People's Temple. You know what I mean? And I think Jeff's book, and I want to thank Jeff, I want to take the time to thank Jeff for writing a book that really became the true tell-all. I call him the Oracle now, and he hates that term. But I want to thank Stephan publicly for taking the time to have sensitivity to share the light on this story from the other perspective. Jim Jones historically is a crazy man, and everyone who followed him down there was crazy. But if you listen to the story, and I know this is only the first part of it, it tells the story of how people really wanted to change the world. And I hope you walk away tonight believing that. I'm not saying the Jonestown experiment did not fail. It did. It failed horribly. But the experience and the potential that these individuals had is powerful, very powerful. And maybe we need it today. I'm sorry, I kind of wandered off.
No, that's
there.
great. That's great. And I'd love to turn it over to you and sort of similar question in a way in terms of the legacy of having Jim Jones as part of your family and sort of also your feeling around you know, what you want people to know about People's Temple and in your experiences and sort of how, you know, how you've sort of dealt with and reckoned with that over the last 40 years.
How much time do we have?
You know, the
well,
brief
first of all,
version.
I've got his blood, but this is not my thing. So that's at least one way in which I'm different from him. My legacy, I first want to say it really doesn't matter what I want people to know. What matters is that a story is told, the story is told in such a way that you folks are invited into it, so you can take from it whatever is meaningful to you. I purposefully did not watch this film because I didn't, I made this, I participated in this because of Shan. I've made my decisions always based on who I like and who I think really cares about the story. And shout out to Shlomo, because director of photography as well, because they work so beautifully together. It was really a treat to watch them. That guy's such a perfectionist. He was pissing Shan off a couple of times, but it was really a treat to sit with them and speak with them. And that has been largely how I've reconciled my past. Is, first of all, students always get a yes. Most everybody else gets a no, unless you show me that you care. And it's pretty evident right away whether or not you do.
Right. Right.
Didn't really answer your question?
Sure, absolutely
That's
did.
really what I want to say.
Absolutely, that's wonderful. Yeah, I appreciate that. I don't want to monopolize time here too much because we've got limited time, so we do have.
Question, Basil.
Yes.
To the survivor, my sympathies and his sons. What made your father choose Guyana? I was 10 years old, on my way out the door to school with my sisters and my cousins, and nobody back home had ever heard the national siren just take off like that. And we were so scared, and we were screaming, and we ran back inside because we didn't know what hit us. Because the truth is, until that siren went off in Georgetown that morning and affected the entire country, 83,000 square miles, we never, ever knew what was going on at Port Kaituma in the jungle. And we've had to live with that. We don't even drink Kool-Aid in Guyana anymore.
Yeah. Well,
It has affected the children, me, and many others growing up. And then even worse than that, there was a continuation to a story that said that 2 little kids were murdered in a bathtub in a house in the city.
Yes.
And that house was just across the way in Lemha Gardens.
yes.
From my grandmother. And that affected Guyanese kids so much. And I have waited so long for somebody to explain to me how did he get to Guyana?
Well, if I
How
can.
did you guys know about Guyana?
Well, if I can start this, Stephen or Jordan, and then first of all, I want to apologize for the stain and the black eye that Guyana received for this, because Guyana was very kind to People's Temple, and People's Temple abused it. They did not know what People's Temple was doing. It was so isolated. But when you say, why Guyana? Well, if you know back at that time, there was a lot of political unrest in Guyana at the time. And the potential encroachment of the border from Venezuela was a worry. So when People's Temple settled in the northwest, I think it is, the northwest, northwest district, that kept Venezuela on their side of the border. Guyana, and I had met with Dr. Reed frequently, and actually on my wedding night, Prime Minister Ford Burnham invited my wife and I to his house to celebrate our wedding, because our birthdays were the same day, our wedding day. They saw this as an opening to help individuals from the United States who were fighting against injustice and racism and the isms that were in the United States. This was the largest installation of U.S. citizens outside the armed forces. And they saw this agricultural project as creating this opportunity for development within the interior. And I went down there, well, it's been 20 years now, but when I spoke to some of the ministers of Interior and what have you, they have also told me that they have not been able to create agricultural projects that were successful. But I also saw a pain in the Guyanese people when we came through there, going like, what did you do to us? Because that's put a stain on Guyana. But it was by no choice on Guyana's part. It was another trickeration that Jim Jones portrayed. I mean, he had he had letters and recommendations from the United States president, senators and governors, you know, that gave Guyanese government recommendations. So they were fooled. They were fooled. But I think the reasoning for Jonestown was not an escape route that it actually became, but it was actually to build a new world. What happened, like I said earlier, the Jonestown experiment failed horribly. But the experience and what they were trying to do, I still recommend it today. They're trying to build a new world for people who are disenfranchised with the United States. I mean, why don't you take it from there?
I think Guyana was chosen because it was a socialist nation, and also because of the border dispute. And so I think that the Guyanese government gave the go-ahead because it strengthened their case for the land, as you said. But I also want to just acknowledge what you're saying and your pain. I did have the opportunity to go back in April of this year, and one of the things that was really strong in my heart was to meet with Guyanese people, because I knew that U.S. citizens and our families and friends were not the only ones that suffered over this. And so I wanted to be available to people because I knew that there were going to be a lot of questions, and there were. And it felt really good for me to be able to do that. And I felt like I went back to Guyana on my own volition, where, as before, I was sent. I didn't have a choice. And one of the things that we did was talk to a lot of the people in Port Kaituma. And I feel very close to Port Kaituma, particularly because of the support and generosity of the people there that made everything possible for us. But people everywhere. The Guyanese people are loving and beautiful, and
that's why it really hurt us.
Yeah, I understand.
And thank you.
Well, the Guyanese people are a beautiful people, of course. And if you want to talk more about this after this, happy to do that with you. I do want to add that Dad, in my opinion, was always looking for an escape route. It was not entirely about building a utopia. I would argue that for Dad, it was very little about that. I know that he was looking for areas that he thought would be least affected by nuclear fallout. And a big reason, too, was that it was a largely black country, and they spoke English. Yeah. Right.
We have time for one last question. I know the time has gone quickly, but one last question. Anyone brave enough? If not, we'll. Oh, right here. Sorry. Yes. Yep.
I guess the rest of the experience will, but those of you that survived, how did you survive?
So how did you survive those that survived? Unless it's a spoiler from the series.
Unless it's a spoiler. I don't know.
You will find out, but
we were playing basketball against the Guyanese national team in Georgetown, Guyana, when it happened. Jordan?
I was in Georgetown. Something made me go down to Jim's cabin and ask to go out, because I knew there was going to be a boat going out. And as I went out on that last boat, the congressman and company were on their way in, and so I cut it close.
Yeah.
Well, actually, about 3 or 4 months prior to the Jonestown incident, I had been sent in to Guyana to learn public relations, and it was a it made sense, a black son doing public relations for his father and his organization in a black country, black ran country. The idea on basketball was started from my other brother, Tim, when he was in Georgetown with the Ministry of Sports, of trying to do a basketball team. And I think some of the genesis of this is a little different because it was seen differently, but when I spoke to the Minister of Information, being in Georgetown at the time, I had tried to work out a kind of round-robin tournament with Suriname, Trinidad, Tobago, Venezuela, and what have you. And the first round-robin was People's Temple against the Guyanese national team, which all live in Brooklyn at this date. At this date, ESPN told me that they researched it, but and it was a PR, you know, something else for the People's Temple organization to kind of put out its normalcy and a connection with the Guyanese people and Guyanese government. So it was. I have to say, Stephan was the one who fought for it, though. I don't know if he realizes that, because we had the idea set up and ready to go, and Jim said no. And the next thing I know is Stephan and my mother talked to Jim, and that changed. So, thank you, Stephan.
It was my mother. Not me.
So I will say, if you watch the rest, everyone you've met throughout the first part of this, you'll see how they survived, what happened to them, but also what happened to their spouses, their children. It's shocking as this thing goes through how the rest of this played out to the news story that we saw at the beginning. And that news story that you saw at the beginning, by the time you see it at the end, it has a whole different meaning, because you see, you know, how the rest of it progressed, and it's, you know, heartbreaking.
And can you just quickly tell us when it's screening on Sundancetv so that people can check it out?
It's going to be on next weekend on Saturday and Sunday nights. So the second half will be on Sunday night, November 18th, but it's November 17th and 18th.
Perfect.
And I know we all want to say thank you so much for coming out on a cold, rainy night and coming in warmly and greeting us. We thank you.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you all so much for taking part and sharing your stories. Very much appreciated. Thank you again. Take care.